Hey all there virtual rafters! How are you doing? Thanks for clicking and welcome! This is the first video in a series of guides to the chapter locations of the storyline that's buried within Raft. Or also, how to obtain the endgame items like engines, bigger storage, and automatic water purification for your Seacraft. This is the second video overall in my Raft playlist. If you're looking for some basics on how to get started in the game, that one might also be helpful. It includes foraging, farming, animal raising, and survival essentials. Oh, and building, because that's something there's a lot of on this channel, so there will be creative mode clip-ups. Now on to the quests. At this time in the updates, you're able to make the receiver and antenna very early on, after fishing them from barrels. These two pieces of equipment are the means for finding your way to very specific map locations where three main story islands are located, as well as use for subsequent chapter locations. Our three chapter 1 locations are the Radio Tower, Vazagatan Island, please correct me if I'm wrong about that pronunciation, and Balboa Island. In this video, we're covering the first one, the Radio Tower, along with the navigation setup needed to find your way to these spots. I'll do follow-ups for the rest and include some of the more interesting sightings that could potentially be part of the lore in each. Before we talk about sailing, we need a radar to help us find pinpoint locations. Note the setup of the receiver requires not one antenna, but three. And they require special placement that is about 3 foundations apart from each other. But also, they've got to at least be on a floor above the raft's base. Oh, and they also have to be placed on the same floor as the receiver or within half a level to create the correct signal. Yep. We put them down approximately where we hope they'll work, add a battery into the tray of the receiver, flip on the screen, and if the towers are within range, a radar will appear showing the islands nearby, along with their distance from your location. If the antennas aren't quite in place, it will show you the error screens instead. The radar puts the player at the center, and the dots around you in green are islands. The number below is the distance away. One can roughly tell how fast they're approaching or departing an island by watching how fast the numbers are moving. Story islands will be highlighted in blue. To lock our receiver onto a specific story island, we've got to look at our journal by pressing the T key. This is where you find the story progress over the long run, but it will also have the coordinates for the radio tower. The 4-digit code is entered into the receiver by using the pressable up and down buttons, plus the lever that's located on the side to switch inputs. Once the code is in, the blue dot will pop up with the distance. Now the challenge comes in adjusting our sail or sails to get going in the corresponding direction to make that number go lower on the radar, and hopefully quickly. The radio tower is directly in a current, so once that current is found, the first step in story progress isn't far away. More adjustments to the sails may be required if you find yourself drifting away from the intended target. As you might have noticed already, Trustworthy and I didn't start looking for the story islands right away. The Raft City going is evidence that we've been exploring many islands, already unlocking recipes while stocking and outfitting the raft. It's nice to have the backpack upgrade from the Raising of Llamas to carry all the stuff that you might find while adventuring on these story stops. We are using a couple of mods for storage you might see. Those can be found on Raft Mods, and I'll do a video on some of the useful ones that change gameplay from only a tiny bit to a whole lot. We took some of the grind work out to make it more possible for Trustworthy to advance in the game with his busy schedule, but you may find them enjoyable additions to your game as well. There's even one to add some more furniture and a working TV that will play back YouTube videos. Yes, it's possible to have even more fun with this game. Arrival at the radio tower. It's time to top up on food and water. Pack some along for the journey, as there's a little to go through and some jumping puzzles involved. The lowest floor is mostly submerged underwater, and sharks can still attack while below the waterline, so watch your backside. Your objectives here are finding notes. Mostly importantly, the one with the code for your next story location. One note is found underwater in a briefcase that's jamming open the door. The second and third are found on the lower structure of the tower. That would be rooms marked B1 and C1. Once those buildings are sufficiently looted, it's on to the jumping puzzle. To get to the third floor, look for a red trash can next to a locker. Jumping on these will start a path up to the next level of things to grab before finding the stairs. It takes some balance beam work and massive leaps of faith to climb the rest of the way to the wheelhouse. Alright, so it seems like looking at some of these notes and trying to make sense of them, that a team of engineers was sent to this area to work on some new technology. Reactors that may have been some of the last functional left on the planet. These first few notes appear to be diary entries about dangerous work and suspicions about the employer that sent them there. Once inside the wheelhouse, you'll find the last of the notes possible in the steering cabin. The whiteboard in the room has a post-it note that we definitely want for the coordinates, but also look down for the blueprint laying about, because that headlamp is going to be an upgrade that comes in handy shortly. There's a photo with the word Utopia, ? Can we hope someday that there will be one? Or at least dry ground civilized society? It can even literally have the name Utopia, and that's cool as long as it's a civilized society. The lack of it is starting to show in the storyline. Characters look like they're getting a little cuckoo, the code name for the engineer that's writing these notes. When finally done getting everything you want, bail off this decaying structure and set back out for water with this new set of coordinates punched into the radar controls. The last note entry was for a series of radio traces. Something about a melee distress call and a gunshot. But we still don't know if any of it has to do with where we're headed at this point. Elusive plotline building. Nice. It's part given recounts, left behind in communications, and a whole lot of speculation. From already finishing the questline progress on Another World, I can say that it continues to carry this pattern of questline storytelling through the end of Chapter 2. What is developing here looks like it could be quite sinister. I mean, listen to this particular sequence from events within the notes collected at the radio tower. They left us behind on the reactor testing platform, then blew the foundations. The water's been rising slowly. Owl thinks we should go after them. I wish I didn't agree with him. As best as I can tell from the other notes left behind, them is the stranded engineer's employer, who shipped him here along with 3 of the others to do maintenance on a prototype nuclear power plant or engine of some kind. Owl being one of the coded names given to the workers because of ongoing scrutiny to their project. This technology is suffering failures, but the rich people still wanted it anyway, and left some of the engineers for dead while taking another to keep the machines running. The remaining people on the sinking platform were able to make it to the radio tower, and we find the diary entries left behind, as well as a list of radio traces. The diary vaguely walks us through a whistleblower starting a chain of events that landed them in this situation. Little doodles start showing up after a couple of notes in, and then of course there's the notes left for us all over the walls. It suggests that the writer was starting to struggle with not only the guilt from their situation, but also with isolation effects. The list of radio traces reveals this sequence of events: first a distress call followed by a connection, but an inability to communicate effectively due to language barrier. Then a gunshot is heard and the comm connection is lost. As things continue to deteriorate on the radio tower, they seek another location and leave behind a note for their friend Apollo. Well, this just went from 0 to 100 real quick. The threats in this world aren't just the endless ocean, sharks, or starvation. We also get to worry about rich people antics. It's somehow not surprising to hear that wealthy people might be capable of disregarding human life and hell, leaving this engineer to die while taking the engines they did find valuable. Rich people are pirates. I know a bunch of them. Thick as thieves they are in the exotic car scene. It's full of fraudsters and human traffickers, and no, I'm not exaggerating about any of this. Actually working on a video about it for another series. Science behind why rich people are more unethical than the average citizen. A billionaire will definitely leave you for dead. Unfortunately, I know this firsthand, but that's a story for another time. Tangaroa is a huge zone, and there's some fun podcasts featuring social studies done on the wealthy. Amusing they are. But back to the story in RAF, because the last note is a post-it note with coordinates for the receiver in just one word: people. It's found on a whiteboard with an interesting photo that might be a clue about the future story. This board has gotten a change at some point from the original story release. It used to contain several newspaper articles that indicate a story of our watery surroundings. Not entirely sure why they were removed, but something similar pops up later on in the game. There's actually front pages plastered all over different surfaces in the story mode that have clues, and I'll get to them as they come along in the zones. If you get up close to them, some of the headlines in the articles can actually be read by squinting at your computer screen. They get pretty darn interesting. Some of it tells a timeline of pretty dystopian stuff that goes beyond the hinted climate change. Other sinister societal themes were not left out, and it's what actually makes this storyline ever increasingly engaging. I think it's definitely got trustworthy. No longer than we'd located the coordinates for the next location and made our way back to the raft, he had numbers punched into the receiver with the anchor raised. Because people, ? We have a lot to speculate about with the current clues. What is going on with these prototypes, and what purpose do the rich folks have for them, or the engineer that they took to provide fixes? What happened to the other end of the radio connection? What a cliffhanger of a radio transmission. But what does it all mean? We'll hopefully find out in future story videos, but I wanted to revisit a concept touched on that's extremely fascinating part of the story, and a challenge that people would face if they were actually stuck in this situation in real life.
Professor Ian Hickey is the co-director of Health and Policy at the Brain and Mind Institute at the University of Sydney.
It's not breaking us off from the rest of the sensory world. So we're still aware of light and dark and day and night and activity, and still going about most of our other regular activities: eating, sleeping, functioning, talking, communicating. What we're not doing is operating in the same normal social group functions that we normally would. So a lot of social group functions aren't just talking and speaking. They do depend on facial interaction. They do depend on physical interaction. They depend on people rubbing up against each other, hugging each other, intimacies with each other, and operating in social groups together. So humans don't really operate as single automatic machines. They operate as part of complex social structures. So it's the breakdown in those complex social structures, the focus on face in real time, the focus on other non-verbal signals that is very important to the way we orientate ourselves to function as humans. The sheer emotionality of that, the way that influences our thinking, the way it influences our sense of well-being is dependent on that and is strongly disrupted in the current circumstances.
And so that disruption and that sort of removal from face-to-face interaction, is that likely to have just sort of short-term impacts on our mental health, or could there also be long-term impacts that come out of that?
So in the short term, all of these changes are risk factors for the onset of more significant mental health problems. So what matters here is how long this goes on for as to how disruptive it becomes.
How long would this need to go on for it to start being really concerning? Are we talking 6 months or a year or 2 years? What time frame generally would start to cause concern?
Well, there's going to be another curve, which is the mental health curve. And there's a lot of speculation at the moment, or attempt to underpin the science of this. Most of the predictions at the moment is if this goes on for more than 3 months, we will start to see significant impacts on mental health, things like suicide rates, things like other forms of social dislocation, things like domestic violence, other antisocial behaviour. And 3 months is probably the sort of period. Most of us can cope with this for a few weeks if we know that we're going back to some normative process after that. If it becomes more than 3 months, and certainly at the moment, everyone expects the disruption to last at least 6 months, we need to be getting ourselves organised and thinking about behaving differently individually and socially across that period.
3 months. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't feel very long to me. It's surprising how quickly we humans can start to unravel. In fact, prolonged social isolation, in which a person isn't just alone, but actually feels lonely, has been found to increase the risk of premature death by 26%. It also increases the risk of suicide, and it's been linked to depression and poor immune health. But why? What's going on in the brain? How does isolation actually change the brain?
We can imagine that perhaps Mike was starting to suffer psychologically, and it led to some of the symptoms talked about in the podcast. It might explain why he felt the need to tell us that he named the shark Bruce. Would have understandably thought that Bruce was even a hallucination, but the evidence of the shredded cage indicates perhaps the shark was not a lie. What areas of Mike's brain started to shut down to benefit his adaptation to the new environment around him, and would it affect his ability to escape? For being such a brightly colored and beautiful game, there's a very dark and unsettling side. Who needs zombies or monsters when reality is so much scarier? But it's time for us to get back to fishing for trash. Hopefully this video is helpful in finding your way to the first chapter story progress in Raft, and that you'll be enjoying your new engine shortly. Thanks for sticking around, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your day. Big hugs for the hugger types. Take care, y'all, and bye-bye!